The progression of America focusing on itself to focusing on other countries inevitably led Americans to discover the true amount of power it had.
The Gilded Age began in America after the election of 1877. The period was filled with economic growth and corruption. Factories flourished in the North. Immigrants came to work in factories, and they lived in tenements in the city. Monopolies in oil, steel, railroads, and etc. began to form and take over politics. Political machines also popped up and worked under bosses to further corrupt politics. American author Mark Twain was the first to coin the term Gilded Age due to its corruption and published his famous novel, The Gilded Age. Also during this time period, America expanded its economy outside the U.S., and it did this by gaining new territories such as Hawaii, which later became a state under Eisenhower. America also took over Cuba and the Philippines for economic gain. Imperialism was a major theme of this era. Every nation was gaining new territory for economic gain. In order to catch up with other countries, America needed economic power in the Pacific Ocean.
America then progressed to the Progressive Era. During this era, reform groups formed to change America for the better. Some reformers fought to destroy monopolies and corruption in politics. After muckrakers such as Upton Sinclair in his novel The Jungle, these people tried to expose the horrible conditions of the tenements, the meatpacking industries, and the unsafe working condition of factories. Reform groups also formed to stop these problems as well. Policies such as the FDA and the Interstate Commerce Act were created to end these problems. During the Progressive Era, World War I broke out. America did what it could to stay out of the war. It was not our war and not worth the loss of lives of Americans. Treaties were created with Germany so it would leave the U.S. alone when it tried to send aid to its allies. Woodrow Wilson declared the U.S. neutral. Soon America had no choice but to join the war after Germany broke all its treaties with America. After a victory, America went back to being isolationist. Prohibition had begun and women had gained the right to vote. Thus, the Roaring Twenties had begun. During the Roaring Twenties, the American economy took a turn for the worse. This economic turn for the worse led to the Great Depression. FDR did what he could to end this depression. He created the New Deal policy. FDR also had to deal with keeping America out of World War II, which had just begun. America ended up entering World War II after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. After another victory, America realized what power it had. After realizing the amount of power it had, America went on to tackle other problems such as the spread of communism in the Soviet Union. But this feeling of being powerful was short-lived. After World War II, the Cold War begun. The purpose of this war was to stop the spread of communism and to win the nuclear arms race. Popular children's author Dr. Seuss wrote a popular allegory about the nuclear arms race.
This is the Korean Peninsula. It is divided into two countries, North Korea and South Korea. Doesn't look that important, does it? Well, let me tell you. It was here that America got its first real big shock with the Korean War between 1950 and 1953. After World War II, the country of Korea had been split into two separate countries, the Communist North Korea and the Democratic South Korea. And of course I say democratic because I can't use my fingers. In 1950, North Korea deliberately invaded South Korea as an attempt for unification under the guise of our beloved leader Kim Il-sung, and ruthlessly attacked, driving the South, who were mercilessly beaten. And America decided it was time to intervene. A UN task force came in 1950 later, and then went in and totally whooped the North Koreans, beating them so bad they drove them all the way back to the border near China. And the Chinese were not happy about it, having the UN near their border. They invaded themselves, driving the UN all the way back down to South Korea. And from there, the war turned into a stalemate battle, both sides vying for control of the border. Eventually, both sides just gave up in 1953 after Joe Stalin died. And from there, it more or less remained the same as before. North Korea was still communist, and South Korea was still democratic. But this wasn't like the previous American wars. This wasn't really a victory. It was a draw. A draw? Yes, a draw. We hadn't beaten the North, and the North hadn't beaten us. How could this be? How can America be duped like this? We never lost a war.
After an unsuccessful war, some Americans realized its country didn't have the power it thought it had to stop the spread of communism. One of these people was President Eisenhower. Eisenhower supported the nuclear arms race and believed America should be prepared for war if it were ever to be attacked, but he did not support going into a country and trying to solve their problems. Like Washington, Eisenhower also saw danger in alliances. But President Johnson was not like Eisenhower. Johnson sent troops into Vietnam to stop Viet Cong from spreading communism to all of Vietnam.
Made public their efforts to defend at all costs an outpost situated on a small valley enclave known as Phu Bai. Following the media briefing, CENTCOM provided these choice words. The NVA are about to feel the full wrath of American might.
Many Americans did not support the war in Vietnam, for they believed it was not our war and not worth the loss of lives. The Vietnam War ended under President Nixon, but it was not a victory for America. America had lost yet another war. At this point, America had realized it didn't have the power to solve all the world's problems. America inevitably learned this by winning wars to protect itself and by losing wars for trying to protect others.